Hello, and welcome to the new six-part video series on using play therapy for children who have special needs. My name is Lucy Bowen, and this is my happy assistant, Bill, and we're going to take you, as I said, on a six-part series, a six-part journey, I hope, to help you better understand play therapy, and what are its benefits for the children, for our special needs children. How can play and play therapy help aid the child's learning, their development, and help with their emotional well-being? So, as I said, my name is Lucy Bowen. Just to give you a short introduction to myself, I am a play therapist with the National Association for Play Therapy India and have been with the organization since they launched in 2015. I'm originally from the UK, and I have my Master's, my MSc in Play and Therapeutic Play, and my BSc in Social Science, specializing in psychology and child development. I've done extensive studies in child development, child psychology, child and family therapy, and have been working with children in various different contexts for around 14 years. So, as I said, I'm the play therapist with the National Association for Play Therapy, and we have been providing our training programs across India and Sri Lanka now for the last 2 years, and we're very, very happy to introduce this new online program to help those of you working with special needs children better understand the benefits. So we're going to go on a six-part series, as I said, and today's session is going to be providing you with more of an introduction to play therapy. And it will be a little bit more theoretical than the upcoming sessions, which will be giving you lots and lots of practical examples. And through the upcoming sessions, we are going to be looking, as I said, the theory and the principles of play therapy, along with the sort of techniques and the practical examples, so that you can start to integrate it into your current practice with children. So we're going to start today with an introduction, and over the next two sessions we're going to look at the stages of play. We're going to look at sensory play, role play, and projective play. To that we're also going to move on and look at repetitive play patterns. We're also going to talk what's very important about child empowerment through play. That's how we can actually empower your children to become more independent. We can empower them to bring about their own changes, their own learning and their own development, and their own willingness to want to participate in the environment. And we're also going to look about building resilience and helping the child regulate their emotions through play. So what I hope I'm going to help you to understand throughout this video series is the importance of play, the therapeutic benefits of play, the stages of play and understanding the level where you need to be meeting your child during play, the skills and techniques to help your child progress and further develop their play skills, but also how this development through play isn't just about developing play skills, but it's actually about learning lifelong skills and helping your child become more independent and more integrated into society and into their environment. So we're just going to start then by thinking about what is play and what do we mean when we say play or we're playing with our child. What actually does play mean? Because in order to understand how play can be therapeutic, we first need to understand the concept of play. And play might be a term that we use in our day-to-day lives, but very often is kind of misunderstood. You know, when I ask people what they mean by play, very often they say it's something fun, or it's a leisure activity, or it's something that has to be done when the child finishes their work. But what's very important for us to understand is that that play is actually a child's work. It's not something separate. The play is actually fundamental to your child's learning and development. Because what we often forget and what we don't realize is that, you know, when we say our child has to do their work and we sit them down at a desk and we do a one-to-one directive activity with the child, in general we're only working towards one goal at a time. But when the child is engaged in play, then we're working on the holistic development, because simultaneously when we play, we have a physical element, we have cognitive element, We have creativity, we have imagination, we have social, we have interaction, and we also work on the emotional, because when we play, and generally we relieve stress and we feel much more happier and motivated. So it is very important to understand that when children play, they're not just having fun and they're not just messing around, but actually with every interaction, the child is actually exploring the world. We take one very simple example which many of us might get irritated by. For example, we have a box of toys and the child just pours it out onto the floor. Or they just open our stacking rings and they just throw them out. And for us, we might think, that's very frustrating, why can't the child do what I want them to do? But actually, we should not dismiss anything that the child does, because there's always some learning that takes place. Firstly, when we throw the rings, we get visual stimulation and we get auditory stimulation. But we also get to learn about concepts, for example, of empty and full when we're thrown out of a box. We get to learn about object placement. We get to learn about object permanence. We also get to learn, about weight and distance. There's so many different skills that we learn when we are actually interacting and engaged with our environment and engaged with other people. So it's really important to understand that there is always meaning and there is always learning that can take place. Just sometimes it might be a little bit different to what our original goal was or what our original focus might have been. But as we go through this video series, as I said, I hope that I'm going to give you some ideas to build on your creativity and sort of help with that understanding that no matter how the child chooses to engage with their environment, there is some way that we can connect with the child to encourage learning, to encourage development, and to encourage interaction at that point of time. Because it's very important we also remember that it's this child's exploration with their environment that enables them to move to these higher levels of cognitive functioning. It's as we start to engage with our environment and with other people that we can actually internalize these elements and actually begin to understand them. So play is how we learn, it's how we begin to interact, it's how we test our behaviors, we explore our boundaries, we understand what we like, what we don't like, what we can do, what we can't do, and essentially it's how we learn how the world actually works. And essentially then, there are two ways that children can learn. And not even just children, there's two ways that anybody, even us as adults, there's two ways that we can actually learn. And this can be through instruction, or it can be through play, through hands-on experiential learning. And as I said, instructions can often lead to confusion, especially in the case where your child might have communication difficulties, they might be non-verbal, or they might have a speech delay. Then this instruction can often be very confusing, and that can actually cause added stress on the child, which can cause them to be maybe inattentive or distracted or become angry. So if we teach by instruction also, usually we are just having one goal, as I said, one goal in our mind. So we actually limit what the child can take from that situation. And as I said, there's always some learning that can take place from the situation, even if it's not, the learning that we wanted to happen at that particular moment in time. I mean, the most important thing is that the child isn't necessarily working towards our one specific goal. The most important thing is that the child is learning and the child is becoming more able to understand, more able to connect to their environment, more able to engage, more able to communicate, more able to interact. We have a whole variety of goals that can be worked on through different individual targets, but when we work through play, we can work on, all of those things simultaneously, as I said. For example, excuse me, if we take our stacking cups, and very often we might find that we want the child to stack the cups in size order, and very often we're taking hand over hand for the child so that they can put the cups one on top of each other or one inside of each other. But what we might find is that, okay, even though the child might be able to complete this task there and then at the table when we're putting them hand over hand and we're forcing the child to put the cups in size order, If we are doing exactly that, we are forcing them, we are directing them every step of the way, then it becomes very unlikely that the child is actually going to start to pick up that and want to actually do it by themselves, especially in the case where your child might just have wanted to sit at the desk and tap the cup, and they're not actually interested to put the cups in the size order. All the time we have to stop them from tapping, and we have to make them put the cups in the order to meet our agenda, and it's not very likely that the child is ever going to give that full attention and focus to the activity if they're always distracted by tapping the cup, which is obviously that sensory seeking behavior. But as I said, with every interaction the child has, they're gaining something from that. So my child is tapping the cup, then they are getting that auditory input. They're also getting the visuals of the movement from the cup. So sometimes we might need to think, okay, the child isn't interested to stack the cup right now. The child wants to tap the cup. Is there any way I can interact with that child to, achieve any other goals? For example, maybe the child is tapping the cup. I can join them. Maybe we can tap the cups. Or slow. Or loud. Or maybe we can count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or maybe the child is tapping and I'm going to make an interactive game. I'm going to take the cup from the child and the child is going to stretch for up and down and left and right. So we're working on the visual tracking, the concepts of up and down, left and right. Maybe I'm going to put it on my head. So when the child wants to take it from me, they're going to make eye contact from me and take the cup. So again, we're building on those interactive skills. And if I'm making it fun for the child, then obviously the child is much more likely to internalize those concepts than if I'm actually just forcing them to do something. Obviously, if we want to integrate a way that we like the child to do something, we can also make that fun as part of the game. Okay, I'm going up, I'm going down, and left, and right, and, I'm coming with the cup and it's going on top. And the next cup is coming on top. And we're going to knock them down, and they crush down. So, we want all the time to be trying to make it fun and interactive with the child. And if the child is engaged and they're having fun, then there's so many different concepts that they're going to be learning, so much incidental learning that takes place. And when the child doesn't realize that you're trying to force them to learn, you're trying to force them to do something that they're not interested in, you're still meeting them, meeting their sensory needs, and at the same time you're encouraging that interaction, you're making it fun, you're making yourself also engaging, then the child is not only learning to engage more productively with their environment, they're also going to start to learn to interact and to communicate and build that relationship with you as well. And when you have that relationship with the child, then it's much, much easier for any learning to actually take place. So as I said, when we teach for instruction, it can not only be confusing, but usually we have only one particular goal in mind at a time. And again, when we are looking with children with special needs, children on the spectrum especially, then it's also very, very important that we don't just model one particular way that the child should be doing something, or one particular use for every item or every object. Because one difficulty that children often develop is that rigidity, that lack of flexibility, that inability to accept change. Excuse me. And as I said, if we are trying to all the time just work towards one goal and show that everything has to be done in a specific way, then obviously we are adding to that rigidity in the child, because we are teaching the child that everything can only be done one way, and if it's not done that way, then it's wrong, then it becomes a problem. But obviously, if we can show the child that, okay, we can tap the cups, we can stack the cups, we can wear the cups as a hat, we can move some stuff around with the cups, if we can model lots and lots of different ways in which the child can engage and interact with their environment, then we're actually helping to build on the child's flexibility, and we're actually helping to work on the child's adaptability as well. And furthermore, there are certain skills as well that we can't teach just through instruction. Coping skills such as compassion, such as self-regulation, These are things that we can't teach through tabletop activities. And the actual confidence and the actual motivation to want to learn, these are things also that can very often actually be lost when we try to teach through tabletop activities. Because when we are focusing on what we want and not on what the child wants, or if we're telling the child that they're doing things wrong, or that they have to do this or we have to do that, and we're being very, very constantly directive, then we can actually reduce the child's confidence. Because if the child feels that they're bad at something, or if the child feels that they're all the time doing something wrong, then they're going to be much less likely to actually participate and to engage. And the same goes for the motivation. If something's fun, if something's of interest to the child, then they'll be much more motivated to actually get involved. Whereas if we're very much focusing on our goals and our agenda, then the motivation to actually participate is always going to be very, very less. So essentially, when we use play, we are providing child with the most sort of open and child-centered experience to learn and to develop. As I said, unintentionally, the demand that we put on our children often causes a lot of stress. When we're going to school, when we're going to extra classes, when we're going for therapy, then this can often put a lot of demand and a lot of stress on the child, and that can very often also lead to negative behaviors. But when we use play as the main way to actually interact with our children, then we have the added benefit that we're actually addressing your child's emotional well-being as well. Because if your child is happy, if your child is given an outlet to relieve their stress, if your child is given a chance where their interests are being focused on, then it's much more likely that they're, like I said, they're actually going to interact with us and they're actually going to engage in the activity. So as well as the developmental benefits of play, there are also a large number of therapeutic benefits as well. And when we use play, we can actually help children to overcome their behavioral issues, emotional issues, and social issues. We can help to aid social interaction. We can encourage communication. We can help the child to develop an understanding of themselves and the social world. And in general, we can help towards better social integration, growth, and development of the child. Excuse me. So as I said, there are a lot of benefits to play, and as we go through this video series, we're going to start to focus in more detail on the specific aspects. So today we're just going to go on to look at the general overall theory and how we can actually start to apply the principles of play therapy. So, as we've said then, as I said, we started off just by giving a sort of a contextualization as to what is meant when we talk about play. And as I said, I've talked about the benefits of the play, and I've talked about how play is the child's work and it is fundamental to the child's development. So now we're just going to have a little talk about play, and we're going to define play work, and link that then to play therapy to help understand the differences between the three. So play, by its purest definition, is a physical or mental leisure activity that is undertaken purely for enjoyment or amusement and has no other objective. So this is a dictionary definition for play, and obviously when we describe play in this manner, we're talking essentially about free play. And that means that it is for enjoyment. As many people say, play is fun, and play should be fun so that the child is engaged. So if we're looking at purely free play, we don't have any agenda or we don't have any objective. But obviously, as I talked about, because the child's engaging in play, they're interacting with their environment, they could be interacting with others, then there are a whole array of incidental learning that will be taking place with your child, for your child, during their play. Play is never meaningless and play is never a waste of time. Excuse me. But what is important to remember is that play is not the same for everyone, and things are not distinctively play or not play. So it's important to note that just because we think something is play, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be interpreted as such by your child. Just because you bring toys, or what you consider to be toys or playthings, to the session with the child, again, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's play, or that you are actually playing. If I take, for example, this pencil, A pencil isn't something you would classify as a toy. A pencil is a writing tool by original nature. But if I take this pencil and I start to tap, and I start to make music, and I start to have fun, I start to be engaged, and I start to enjoy, then it actually becomes play to me. Excuse me. It actually becomes play to me. So depending on the level of playfulness depends on whether it can actually be interpreted as play by the child or not. So if I bring all the playfulness of the situation and my child can interpret that situation as play, they're having fun, they're engaged, then it's likely that it can be interpreted as play. So things essentially can be characterized as more or less play depending on the level of playfulness. But if your child, for example, takes cars and they like to spin the wheels, or they like to line up their objects, or they like to tap, or they like to just flap things around, then just because we might categorize that as not being normal play by the definitions of what we consider to be play, if it can still be considered to be play for the child, as I said, if they're engaged, if they're stimulated, if they're enjoying what they're doing, then that for the child can be play. If it's relaxing for the child, if it's stress relieving, if it's fun, as I said, if it's stimulated, then to your child, what they are doing can be considered as play. So as I said, everything has meaning. It's not that we have to dismiss my child doesn't know how to play, but rather we have to understand what is considered play to your child and how we can try and be attuned to that, and how we can try and join with the child in their interests through their play, and actually then start to expand and build the relationship, and then build on their play skills and help them to further learn and develop through the use of play. So I'm just going to touch briefly on play work, because many educators, many parents, many therapists that I've come across that use play in their practice very often are carrying out play work. So play work is obviously something that does engage children through play, but the objectives of play work are not usually therapeutic as such. Usually the therapeutic benefit, the stress relief and the fun element, occurs as a secondary effect, obviously only if your child is interpreting the situation as play. So very often in play work, there are a lot of rules applied and a lot of games are often played, which doesn't happen so much in therapeutic play, as we're going to talk about in the coming few slides. So usually play work usually has very, very set goals, and is used to assist the educational process. We could be working on your child's language targets, we could be working on specific cognitive targets, but very often, we are working towards specific targets. We're just trying to integrate play principles, play practices into to help us to achieve those targets. Whereas when we work in play therapy, our primary focus is to be therapeutic. It is to follow the child's choices, to follow the child's lead, to give the child choices, to give the child that feeling of control, to take care of the child's emotional well-being, that they are happy, that they are stress relieved, that they are meeting your child's needs and your child's interests. So play therapy then is the dynamic process between the child and play therapist, in which the child explores at his or her own pace and with his or her own agenda those issues, past, current, conscious and unconscious, that affect the child's life in the present. So the key things to note then is that it's a dynamic process between the child and the therapist, which means that the relationship between the child and the therapist is very important. And that is a relationship that is built on equality. That is a relationship so that the child and the therapist goes on the therapeutic journey together. Not that the therapist is dominated and directive and all the time just putting pressure and demands onto the child. Rather that the therapist and the child are working together for the interest of the child, not just for the goals of the therapist. So as we said, the child explores at their own pace and their own agenda. Again, that means that we are being attuned to the child's needs, to the child's interests, giving the child that control, and giving that child those choices and that feeling of sense of self and sense of ability to explore what it is that interests them. And obviously, as we're going to talk about, we're able to build on the child's needs and the child's interests to help them progress up the developmental ladder. So we're working through a number of key principles then, and these are that we have the belief that every child has the ability to learn, to develop, and to reach their full potential. They just need to be appropriately facilitated. And it's our job as a play therapist, or as someone trying to integrate the principles of play therapy, to actually help the child to realize that full potential. So in doing so then, we have to hold each child with positive regard. And that means we're focusing on the child's emotional well-being. We're focusing on the positives of the child. And that means we're accepting the child for who they are. We're following their leads and their interests. We're not just focusing on the negatives. We're not just focusing on the diagnosis, but we're focusing on following the child's interest through play, which is the child's natural language. And we're allowing them the freedom to express and to explore, which essentially will help them to learn and to develop. So through play therapy then, as I said, there's a number of benefits. And when we follow these sort of key principles, we can work on helping the child to develop logical and creative thinking. We can help to improve fine and gross motor skills. We can develop language and communication. We can work towards relationship building, which helps to develop social and group skills. We can aid also with the social, emotional, sensory, and behavioral difficulties that your child might be facing. And as I said, in this session, I'm just giving the general overview of the principles and the benefits of play therapy. And as we progress through the next few sessions, we're going to be more focused on how actually we can use the play to help the child with these difficulties. So we're just going to give a brief outline then of core developmental stages that are often missed or not mastered, and these are also outlined in the floor time model of play with children. So let me say what we will find is that actually most of these stages that are missed out or not completely mastered by children with special needs is very, very often because they follow one from another. So if we haven't fulfilled the lower sort of stage, which in general gets fulfilled through the provision of sensory stimulation, then it becomes very, very difficult for the child to progress up the developmental ladder and master the following stages. And again, in the next session, we're going to be focusing on sensory play and helping to understand how sensory play is absolutely vital to the child's development. So the first stage then is often missed or not mastered is regulation and interest in the world. That is connection to the environment and understanding of and interest in what's happening around us. And as I said, we get that connection, we get that interest from being stimulated through our senses, which wakes us up and attunes us and alerts us to what's happening around us. So first is that regulation and interest. After that regulation and interest, the next step comes the engagement in the world. So that is the distinction between objects and people. Obviously, if we don't have that connection, that awareness, and that interest, then obviously we don't start to have that engagement. If we don't have their engagement then it becomes very, very difficult to us actually to understand how to communicate. So the next step that's often not missed or mastered is that two-way intentional communication. After that, we have things such as continuous problem solving. Obviously, if we're very detached from the environment, then it becomes difficult for us to assess the situation and actually to solve problems within that environment. It also becomes more difficult to us engage in symbolic play. And again, to understand what's happening, to build on our creativity, our imagination, our logical and creative thinking, and also to move to the last stage, the idea of bridging ideas and having that ability to think abstractly, having a false sense of reality and being able to connect through logic, through reasoning, and through emotional thinking. So obviously when we look at logic and reasoning, emotional thinking, again, these are much higher level processes. So if we don't have that ability to engage in our environment, to interact with other people, to understand what's happening around us, then it becomes very, very difficult for us to participate, and also very difficult for us to understand, and difficult for us to regulate ourselves in our environment. So as I said, throughout this series, we're going to talk about how play therapy can actually help to bridge the gap and help us, to fulfill those stages and to actually progress up the developmental ladder. Just to talk very, very briefly, the first idea, having that interest in the world and that self-awareness. So obviously when we're looking at typically developing children, they're often very aware of what's happening around them, and very, very more alert to see what others are doing and actually start to integrate that and participate in a similar manner. But children with special needs are often more restricted in their awareness, and furthermore their engagement in their surroundings and ability to understand is often further hindered by sensory processing issues. So through play therapy, we can help the child to actually engage with their surroundings, and this can also help to work through behavioral and sensory issues. And at the same time, we're always going to be trying to interact with the child as much as possible. And we can also work through play and through play therapy to actually help to build relationships. When we just give commands and we give instructions, then often it's very difficult for the child to form a strong bond or to form a relationship. However, during play, we enable the child to be an equal with us, and they can form an attachment, which can actually help motivate them to want to interact. Because attachment theory is something that's very, very related to play therapy, because it's important, for us to have a strong attachment so that the child feels secure, so that they can actually go out and become involved with their environment. So the attachment to the primary caregiver is also something that's very, very important, and our ability to form a bond with the child in a therapy session is also very, very important. Because our experiences in our early attachment relationship are going to influence our later interactions with other people throughout our lives. If we have a negative experience where we feel that we don't have positive interactions with our primary caregivers, that all the time we feel like we're doing something wrong, and then again we're going to be much less likely to have the confidence and the self-esteem to actually start to interact with others. And again, in the later sessions, again, we're also going to be talking about the idea of child empowerment and helping to build that confidence and self-esteem in children through the use of play. But in general then, play can help to build intimacy as the child begins to recognize faces, recognize sounds, recognize speech. And as the child gains greater recognition in these areas, it also helps to develop vital cognitive and motor skills that will help with improving communication and building their relationships with other people as well. And obviously, as we start to build that, build the relationships and our interactions with the child increases, then the two-way communication also starts to build. And as we increase in that two-way communication, that helps the child with better recognition of cause and effect patterns, with problem solvers, and it also helps in areas of cognitive and social development. And not only are we talking about verbal communication, play and play therapy can help both verbal and non-verbal communication. In terms of verbal communication, during play therapy, we're not reliant on all the time asking the child questions. What is this? What is that? Can you give me this? Can you do that? We're not putting that pressure, we're not putting the demand on the child, but we're actually all the time just narrating the actions of the child to help them to encourage their further language understanding. Because when a child is actually engaged in an activity, when they're focused and we're providing them with the words, we're providing them with the language, we're providing them with the concepts, then the child is much more able to actually internalize that and start to understand these concepts, these principles, and this language. And in the case where the child is verbal, you'll find very often they will just naturally start giving that narration themselves to what they're doing, and therefore increasing their vocabulary and increasing their expressive language. And when we're talking about communication, as I said, we're not just talking about verbal communication, we're talking about non-verbal communication as well, such as facial expressions, body language, and gestures. So play can also help children to figure out the meanings of people's non-verbal communication as well, because when we are, when we're engaging in play, there's a lot of exaggerated expression and animation, and this can help the child to interpret the body language and facial expressions of other people, which is something that also often can be very, very difficult for children with autism, especially. And as I said, all the time we're given that exaggeration, because also given these exaggerated facial expressions and voice modulations, it not only helps the child further to understand what it is that they're saying. If I want to say slowly, it helps them to understand those principles by giving the practical examples, but also it makes us seem a lot more interested for the child, which again is going to increase their interaction, increase their relationship with you, and increase their want to actually communicate and interact. So play then can help children with their complex non-verbal and verbal communication. It can also help children with interpreting emotional ideas as well. And emotional ideas are often part of abstract thinking, which, as we talked about, is a much higher level process. So play can help children to interpret emotions and emotional ideas, especially as they progress further in play and are able to engage in pretend play. And imaginative play is not something that comes that easy to children with special needs. So again, as we go through this video series, we're going to talk about some tips and techniques so that we can use play to actually guide and help encourage children and help them progress through the stages of play. And all the time, as I said, we're giving that narration to what the child is doing, we're giving them the language, and we do the same in terms of their feelings and their emotions as well. We all the time want to reflect back the child's emotions as well as the emotions of us and the emotions obviously of the characters during the play. So imaginative play, as I said, can be difficult for children with special needs, so we need to get creative and we need to get involved. That's very, very important, and as much as possible we want to give the children an outlet to express their emotions as well. And what's also very, very important to remember is that we have to give the children that safe outlet, not only to express their positive emotions, but also to be able to express their negative emotions as well. Because it's important that we don't all the time shut children down when they're angry or when they're sad, but rather we have to give children the outlet to actually express those emotions and gain an insight into their own behavior. So, as well as helping children to interpret emotional ideas, we can also help them with expressing emotional thinking as well. So as we said, all the time we want to continue to emphasize the child's emotions through play to help them gain further insight into their behavior. And we can also help children with their own emotional regulation as they learn how to self-soothe and deal with change and disruptions. So although play can often seem very abstract, as I say, it's actually real life skills that the child is learning. If the child can learn to start to tolerate others during their play, that acceptance of others, if they can accept disruptions and changes in routine, then the child will become adaptable and more acceptable to accepting these things in real life situations as well. So play can help children to self-regulate themselves. They can help them to develop coping mechanisms to emotional responses, and to help them also, be more able to tolerate and deal and regulate themselves during stressful situations. And again, this is something that we're going to continue to talk about in the later sessions as well. So as much as possible, we try to follow the principles of non-directive play therapy when we are working with children. And non-directive play therapy then comes from the Rogerian model of person-centered counseling. So it's called non-directive or child-centered. So as we said, the focus is on the child and not on the therapist's direction. And what we want to do is that we reflect feelings, we restate content, and all the time we want to return the responsibility to the child. It's not that the therapist is dominating the child, but we want to give the control, we want to be given the choices to the child. And we work under the belief that children are able to work out their own problems and to gain an insight and an understanding into themselves through the use of unconditional positive regard. So the goals in person-centered therapy then is to increase the independence and the integration of the child. And in doing that, we focus on the person and not the problem. So we're not going to be wanting to focus on, oh, my child has autism, so they can't do this, or the problem with my child is that they have autism, or my child can't do this, my child can't do that. Rather, we want to focus on what the child can do, what are the child's interests, and how we can work to follow these interests and create the conditions necessary for positive growth. So over time, we want to help the child to develop an openness to new experiences, to develop a trust in themselves as well as that trust in us, to develop their own internal source of evaluation, and most importantly, to have that willingness to actually continue to keep growing. So the important points to remember is that the relationship between the child and the therapist is everything in person-centered therapy. And that relationship is characterized by equality. So it's not that we're all the time standing up and looking over the child, giving them instruction, asking them questions, asking them, why did you do this? What are you doing? What is this? Now you have to do this. The idea is that we're on the same level of the child. We actually get down, we interact, and we play, and we respond to the child. That is the most important thing. The child should feel as an equal to us. We should not feel that we are their superior. And we also have to remember also that there are no necessary specific stages to the process. So we have the trust that the child will bring the session to where they need it to be, and it's about the child's own process of change and growth, which happens at their own pace. We can force the child to do things. For example, I can force the child to sit down at a table, and they might be able to identify some 150 flashcards, but the child might still walk into a room, and they might just pace up and down. They might not be able to pick up anything. They might not be able to engage with anything in their environment. So the idea is that the things that we are working on with the child is that all the time we actually want to help to develop their independence, to help their understanding, and actually so that the child walks in the room and can see what's there and understand what they see and process that information and actually have the motivation to want to actually engage with something or interact with somebody. So the child-centered approach then to play therapy is based on these principles of person-centered therapy, and it's primarily developed by Virginia Axline, and it has the premise that we all have within ourselves the ability to solve our own problems. And the role of the child-centered therapist then is to facilitate the child's growth. It's not that the counsellor takes lead or takes responsibility for the direction of play. We try to follow the child's lead and have that understanding that the play is the child's primary mode of communication. So in working in play therapy then, we try to follow Axline's 8 principles. The first being that the therapist must develop a warm and friendly relationship with the child in which a good rapport is established as soon as possible. So that means that when we start the sessions with the child, we don't go in and start dominating them, we don't go questioning them, rather we join in with the child's play, we're attentive to the child's needs, to the child's interests. We're not trying to force them to do things, we're not trying to force them to follow our agenda, rather we're starting to get to know the child, build that relationship with the child through the use of positive regard. That means the second point then is that we accept the child exactly as he or she is. We don't have the idea that we're trying to change them. We don't have the idea to try and make the child normal. Rather, we're following the child, accepting the child as who they are, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, and how can we work with the child to actually help them to realize that full potential. So the therapist then should establish a feeling of permissiveness in the relationship so that the child feels free to express his or her feelings completely. And as I said, it's not that the child should feel like they're only able to express their positive emotions. It's really important, as I said, to help the child, to give them that safe outlet in which they can express both their negative and their positive emotions. Because it's not wrong for your child to feel angry or to feel sad or to feel frustrated. But obviously sometimes the behavior that is exhibited as a result of this emotion can sometimes be negative. For example, there could be biting, there can be hitting, these sort of behaviors. There might be throwing of objects. These sort of behaviors are often, there's a reason for these behaviors. So it's not that we have to just focus on the actual behavior, but we also have to help the child to gain an insight to that emotion, to understand what's causing that emotion, and help the child to find a resolution, and help the child to find a coping mechanism. Because very often if the child is throwing something and we say straight away, don't throw, then we're just dismissing the child's actual feeling. Whereas it's very important, we might want to say, I understand you're feeling angry. It's very important that we help the child understand that what they're feeling is anger. Because very often you might find that child might exhibit the same behavior whether they're feeling happy or whether they're feeling angry. They might still throw, or they might still hit, or they might still bite. So if we're understanding how the child is feeling, it's first and foremost very important to reflect that back to the child so that they gain that insight. And once they gain that insight, then we can start to correlate that to an event. For example, I understand you're feeling angry because this happened. And also, the other thing is that it's not that we necessarily have to allow the child to demonstrate that behavior. For example, if the child is throwing things and we just tell them to stop, then it's likely that the anger is going to stay within the child and a different behavior is likely to manifest. But if we help the child to gain an insight, I understand that you're feeling angry, but if we throw the toys, they might break. But maybe you might want to squeeze the ball, or maybe you want to tear the paper, or maybe you want to bang the drums. Then we're providing the child with an alternative safe outlet to express that emotion. Whereas if we just tell them, don't hit, don't throw, then we're just dismissing how the child might actually be feeling. So it's important first and foremost that we reflect back to the child how they're feeling, and then we give them different options of a safe mode of expression for that feeling. So it's not that they're not allowed to be angry, but it might just be that if they throw the toy it might break. But if they want to throw the ball, or as I said, tear the paper, or squeeze the clay, then we're giving them with a safe alternative. And because we're not just telling them to stop, because we're acknowledging that feeling, and then we're giving them a safe outlet, and we're giving them a choice, then it's much more likely actually that they're going to internalize this change and modify their behavior themselves into a more safe outlet when they're actually able to understand what it is that they're feeling and able to take control over it by making a choice of a behavior. So the therapist should always be alert to recognizing the feelings of the child and in expressing and reflecting those feelings back to them in such a manner, as I said, so that the child can gain insight into their behavior. The therapist then must also maintain a deep respect for the child's ability to solve his own problems if given an opportunity to do so. So the responsibility to make choices and institute the change, as we said, should be the child's. That's why it's very, very important that we do give the child choices all of the time. Because, for example, if you're feeling very sad and you go with your friends to the cinema and your friends are like, just smile, why don't you just cheer up, why can't you have fun when watching a movie? You don't just suddenly become happy, because you have to process the issues and you have to address it and come to that resolution yourself. But if someone said, I understand you're feeling sad, maybe you would like to do X, Y, or Z, it might cheer you up, and then you actually make the choice of doing something, you engage in that different activity, and you resolve your issue and you become happier. You've made that choice yourself and have been able to institute that change. Whereas if I just tell you, don't throw the cups, throw the ball, it's more likely that you're going to feel angry because you wanted to throw the cups in the first place. But if I first acknowledge your feeling that you're feeling angry and I understand you want to throw things, it's okay to throw something, only we can't throw the cup because it might break something, but we can throw the ball because it's soft, or we can throw the Play-Doh, or we can break it into small pieces, or we can bang the drum, as I said. We're given those choices. So the child has the choice, and the child is more likely to actually be able to internalize that choice and those changes within themselves. So the therapist doesn't attempt to direct the child's actions or conversations in any manner. Rather, the child leads the way and the therapist follows. Very often, we do model certain actions and certain behaviors that we might like the child to do. For example, if the child is holding the shaker like this, we might take a shaker and turn it and shake it this way, or we might pass, or we might put it up, we might put it down. We might model different ways in which the child could play, but we're not trying to force the child to do so. As we said, it should be the child's choice to institute these changes. So the idea again is if we can make things more fun, we can make things more stimulating, we can make us look more appealing as well as the objects in the environment, then it's much more likely that the child is going to actually make changes and further their learning and further their development by themselves. So the therapist then does not attempt to hurry the therapy along. We understand that it is a gradual process and is recognized as such by us as the therapist. So although we are trying to further the child's learning and development, we're not trying to force it. As I said, all the time we want the change, the progress to come from the child. So we're trying to empower the child essentially to bring about those changes within themselves. And in doing that also, we generally establish only the limitations that are necessary to anchor the therapy to the world of reality and to make the child aware of their responsibility in the relationship. So we try to limit rules and regulations as much as possible. In general, we have just 3 rules, and that is the child should not be harmful to themselves, they should not be harmful to the therapist, and they should not be harmful to the materials. And we're going to talk a little bit later about limit setting within the therapy sessions. So as I said, essentially we're trying to empower the child to bring about those changes within themselves. And we do that by creating a fun, warm and welcoming environment where we are holding the child, as I said, with positive regard, we're being non-judgmental, and we're allowing the child the freedom to be themselves, to take control over themselves and over their situation, and to actually make choices and bring about change within themselves. So it's our role, we also need to be very involved with the child all the time, restating what the child says and restating what the child does. We want to all the time give that narrative to the child. We try to avoid asking questions and try to avoid using sayings such as don't and sayings such as no, which obviously put us on that hierarchical role. As we said, that relationship needs to be based on equality, so the child should not be feeling that we are trying to dominate them and that we are superior to them. As I said, it's really important that we're all the time reflecting the child's feelings to help, to help the child gain that insight. We want to give the child choices. We want to give the child the opportunity to express. And it's really important also that we think about the language that we use. Because very often, unintentionally, the language that we use can actually be damaging to the child's self-esteem. And as we said, if the child all the time thinks that they're doing something wrong or they're not living up to our expectations, then again, that's going to hammer down on their confidence, on their self-esteem. And if we don't have confidence and self-esteem, then we're much more likely to have the willingness and the motivation to actually engage. For example, I have a cow and I have a lion, and I ask the child to give me the cow, but the child gives the lion. One automatic response that I usually see is for the parent, or for the therapist, the teacher to say, no, that's not the cow, that's a lion. So automatically we're dismissing the fact that the child has made an effort, they've had that interaction with us and that attempt to participate in the activity. But we made the child feel bad, we've made them feel inferior, we made them feel like they've done something wrong and that they haven't lived up to our expectation. Rather just by, if the child gives the lion, we can simply say, oh wow, it's the lion, oh, and what do I have here? Here's the cow, moo. So I've provided the child with the correct response, but I haven't made the child feel like there's something wrong with them, or that they're unable to give me the correct answer or satisfy my expectations. Rather, I made it playful, I made it interactive, and I demonstrated to the child that this is a lion and that this is a cow. So it's really, really important that we do think about the language that we use, because very often, like I said, when we're saying do this, do that, what is this, why are you doing this, are you a baby, why can he do it and you can't do it, no, not like this, do it like this, why are you doing like that, why are you tapping, stop this, stop that. All of these sort of common phrases that we use with our children, as I said, they can be unintentionally quite harmful for the child's confidence and to the child's self-esteem. So we need to sometimes just put ourselves in the child's shoes and think, how would I feel at this moment in time? Am I asking too much questions? Am I putting too much demand or expectation? Is there a different way that I can model the correct way? Is there a way that I can follow what the child's interest, what they're doing right now, and actually use that to engage them, increase their interactions with me, and then transition, to a different activity or to a different way of using the materials. So we're going to talk a lot more about child empowerment in the upcoming sessions. So we're just going to talk briefly now then about why play therapy. What is the benefits of using play therapy with our special needs children? So when play therapy leads to this growing trust and attachment, as I said, we're working on building that relationship with the child, and for the child to have a secure attachment obviously helps them to build the self-esteem and the confidence to interact with other people and with their environment. So as the child develops that confidence and that interest, then they begin to independently explore the world. And as they start to explore, they're able to engage more imaginatively in play, and this can help to improve social and emotional skills. We can work on developing language, on speech, on social skills and interpersonal relationships. We can help to tackle sensory issues, to encourage desirable behaviors. So there are a large number of benefits to using play therapy. So in these play therapy sessions then, the child will be held with unconditional positive regard. The child is not told off or forced to do anything. As I said, we use a lot of modeling throughout the sessions. So through the therapeutic relationship then, the child can be guided to the correct response and begin to understand and make sense of the world, and to, as I said, by themselves actually start to integrate these changes and to respond differently. So children begin to understand the world inside the therapy room, and this transcends to the world outside. We find that communication begins to develop. The child develops an interest in the world and begins to participate more fully, as I said, both inside and outside of the therapy room. The child begins to discover who they are. They learn about the world, how to cope, and how to respond. So the parent or the therapist then has your role to follow the child's lead and to bring the child into a shared world. So, like I said, very often we all the time just want to bring the child into our world and to meet our goals and to meet our agenda. But what we have to remember is that very often the child has very little interest in our world. If we're trying to make them do a puzzle and the child just wants to stim or flap around, then they're very happy doing what they're doing because they're getting this stimulation. And for them, that's going to be much more interesting than doing a boring puzzle. So first we have to enter the child's world. We have to be attuned to their interests, and once we've done that, then we can try to integrate aspects of our world and our agenda into theirs in a fun and playful manner. For example, if the child is flapping the puppet, maybe I'm going to come and I'm going to take the puppet. The puppet's coming. Oh, the puppet's got your hand. Oh, what now? The puppet's got the puzzle pieces. Oh, he's got all the puzzle pieces. And maybe we're going to throw them up. Oh, no, and the puzzle pieces all fell down. Should we pick them up? Oh, no, we're going to put them in the puzzle. So this is just one idea how you can, you can use play to make things fun, to make things interactive. But first we have to enter into the child's world. We have to be attuned to the child's needs and to the child's interests, not just forcing them into our world. Because remember, the relationship is something that is really, really important. So we want to meet the child at his or her current development level, and once we've entered into the child's world, then we can use specific techniques to try and challenge them to move up the hierarchy of milestones, again, which we're going to talk through as we progress through the later sessions. So the parent or therapist should follow the child's lead with playful, positive attention, tuning into the child's interests. So it's really important that first, before we try to challenge the child, we first have to have that connection with the child, and we have to build that relationship. So we're just going to talk briefly about limit setting. So, as I said, we are holding the child with positive regard. We are giving the child the freedom to express, but it's not that we're just allowing the child to do whatever it is that they want. Obviously, we need to make sure that we prevent the child from hurting us, from hurting themselves, or from hurting the play space. And obviously, the child has to understand that there are consequences to their actions as well. But again, it's not that we can't enforce rules, but it's to do with the types of language that we use. So we want to keep rules short and to the point. We want to avoid trigger words like no or don't. and we try to use neutral language. So, for example, if the child is constantly throwing the car or bashing the car, and it's likely that the car is going to break, so they're breaking one of the rules essentially, that they're going to cause harm. It's really important that we don't just say, "What are you doing? I told you we can't break the toys. Why do you keep doing that? Stop doing that right now." No, it's more important that we understand why the child is doing it. So it could be that we understand that the child is doing it for sensory stimulation. So maybe we might want to provide them with drums or musical instruments or different things that they can tap to get a similar sound. Or it might be that the child is feeling angry, so they're purposely smashing the car down. And as we said, if in the case of that, again, we don't just want to say, "What are you doing? Stop that," because we're dismissing how the child is feeling, we're dismissing the child's need. Rather, again, we can reflect back, "I understand you're feeling angry, I understand you want to bang something, but the car might break. Maybe you'd like to bang the drum, or you'd like to shake the shaker," or, again, we all the time try to give them choices. Obviously, if the child continues to persist, then we might say for the second time, "I understand that you want to bang, but remember we said that the car might get broken. If you want to bang, you can bang this or that. If you continue to bang the car, then I'm sorry, I'll have to take the car away," for example. If the child obviously continues to bang the car, then again, we're not going to say, "What are you doing? I just told you." We're going to say, "I understand, so you feel like banging, but remember, if we keep banging the car, then it might break. So I'm very sorry, now I'm going to have to take it away. But if you'd still like to bang, you can bang the cups, you can bang the drums, you can bang the ball, because I understand that you are feeling like banging." So we have to follow through on our statements. We have to help the child to understand there are consequences to the actions, but all the time we want to try and address that underlying issue that is causing that specific behavior. And what's also really, really important to note as well is that play therapy should never be used as a reward or a punishment. So it shouldn't be that if you behave bad or if you don't stop that, you can't have your play therapy sessions anymore. Or if you're really, really good in school this week, then you can go for your play therapy session. Because play therapy, as I said, it should never be used as a reward or a punishment. Play therapy is something that's used to facilitate the child's growth. Play therapy is built on an equal relationship. Play therapy is built on trust and built on consistency to help build the child's confidence, to help build the child's self-esteem. So it's not something that should be used as a reward or a punishment. And in general, play therapy sessions should take place in the same place, with the same materials, at the same time, with the same person every week. It should be consistent so that the child does build that trust. And does build that confidence to participate in the sessions and see is it something positive that can actually help them to bring about that change within themselves. So some questions that we might have then is, how often should I conduct play therapy sessions with my child, or what should the duration of each session be? So obviously it depends who you are and watching this video, and I'm very happy to answer or give any personal recommendations in relation to this. Obviously, if you're a parent, then you have a choice as to how you want to take the information provided in this video series. Do you want to start individual sort of play therapy sessions with your child in the house every week? If you do, that could be maybe, again, depend on how much time you can give. Is it going to be 1 hour session within 1 week, or can you spare 30 minutes within a day? So again, depending on how much time you can give to your child, then you can designate a certain time that can be specific play therapy times in which you're going to work to follow the child's lead, and you can help the child to understand that during these times it's the child's special time and you're not going to tell them what to do, you're going to follow and be with them whatever they like to do. So obviously that's one option. Another option obviously is that you can take the key principles and the techniques and you can start to integrate this into your everyday work and relationship with your child. And obviously if you are a therapist, excuse me, then obviously it does each depend on the individual child, and it depends on the work that the parent is also doing with the child. For example, if the child is very much at a sensory level where they have very little engagement, very little awareness, then the child needs as much sort of stimulation as possible. So they would benefit from multiple sessions, and obviously the more work that the parent is also doing at home, the faster the child is likely to progress. When we're working with children that might have emotional issues or behavioral issues, then usually we'd maybe have 1, possibly 2 sessions within a week, because we don't want the session to be too overwhelming for the child, as I said, when we are dealing with emotional issues and emotional regulation. And in general, each therapy session would usually be 45 minutes to 60 minutes long. So what toys and materials do I need to start the session? Again, it's not really specifically dependent on the toys and materials. The toys and materials are not actually that important. Obviously, the more things that you have available, the more choice the child has, and the more likely the child is going to find something of interest to them. And as we do go through and look at the different types of play and the different stages of play, I will give some examples of some beneficial materials. But what's more important than the materials is your approach to working with the child. So it's not so much about having this toy or this toy to achieve this goal or this toy, but rather it's about following the child's interest. It's about making a choice and a variety of materials freely accessible to the child. As I said, it's about giving your child the choices. It's about building that therapeutic relationship. It's about being creative. So for example, it's not that we just have one toy and it's supposed to have one use. As I said, it's important to model multiple uses of objects and materials to your child so that they can increase their adaptability and their flexibility and their creativity. And obviously, the more ways that you're able to model the useful materials, then the more likely it is that the child is going to find something of interest to them and actually start to imitate you and actually start to utilize the materials in that certain way. Very often, if you show child just the one normal use for an object, that can often be very, very boring for them and not really encourage them to actually take part. The more creative we are, the more likely the child is going to engage. And as I said, we're working on these life skills of adaptability and of flexibility. And as I said, also when you're thinking about your creativity, it's not that, like I said, one object has to be used in a specific way, or we have to use specific objects to achieve specific goals. We should know how the child can pick up any material that you're offering, and and how we can work to achieve some kind of goal with the child. You know, where, like I said, if they pick up the cup and they start tapping, then like I said, we can work on counting, we can work on language concepts, we can work on interaction, we can work on body parts. There's so many different goals that we can work towards. So, like I said, it's about us building our own minds and our own creativity as well to actually help the child to engage and help the child to sort of realize that full potential. So essentially, we need to be creating a safe, a consistent, and a non-threatening environment to help your child to play, to grow, to learn, and to develop. Another question which we often come across is, can play therapy be conducted in group settings? I mean, yes, absolutely, play therapy can be conducted in group settings. And again, as we go through the later sessions, we're going to talk about this in a little more detail. But what's really, really important when we are conducting play therapy group settings is that we are following our key principles. We're trying to give the child the freedom to actually engage, the freedom to actually, that independent engagement, which is something really important. So we want to be stimulating, we want to be fun, and we don't want to be forcing the child. Rather, we want to be creative, we need to be involved, we need to be modeling, and we need to be making it stimulating so that the child feels enticed to actually engage. And as the child actually starts to engage more independently, that's when you'll find all the different skills, their imitation, their social skills, their sharing, their turn taking, their fine motor, their good motor, everything actually starts to develop. But if we actually start to force the child to be part of that group and force them to do the actions, then again the child, for example, is more likely to pull away. And if the child pulls away, if they're not interested, if it loses its fun element, then there's the child is going to take much less away from that situation than if they actually started to engage by themselves. For example, I might sing, we're going to take our hands and we're going to clap, clap, clap your hands, clap, clap, clap your hands, clap, 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 clap. And I put my arms out, and I go out, 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 in, and out. So if I'm modeling, I'm using a lot of expression, I'm trying to make it fun, I'm trying to make it stimulating, and the child sees that, and the child is interested in me, and they're interested in what I'm doing, and they actually start to imitate, they actually start to engage themselves, then there's much more the child is going to take from that situation, and if someone's sitting behind them actually taking their hands and forcing them to clap their hands. Because the minute it's not fun, the minute it's not play anymore, then the child is much more likely to withdraw from that situation. They're going to feel stressed, they're going to feel anxious, and they're going to feel like it's something that they're forced to do and not something that they want to do. When the child participates willingly in something, then they don't necessarily realize that you're trying to teach them, and they learn a lot more when they're having fun and when they're engaged and when they're not stressed. So as I said, it's really important even when we're engaging children in part of a group that we're following our principles. And as I said, we're going to talk about group therapy sessions in the later sessions. I'm going to talk especially about using the use of sensory play activities in group settings, as they don't have any expectation and they give the child the freedom to actually get involved, to express themselves, and to start to interact with their peers as well. So just to round off then, what we're probably all thinking is, what do I do now and how do I get started? So as I said, the purpose of this session was to provide you with the key principles and just a general overview of how play therapy can be beneficial for children with special needs. And as we progress, we're going to next start to look at the different stages of play, understanding the stages of play, and actually how to start to get involved with the interactions at those specific levels, given a lot of practical examples. But I mean, the main thing to take away from this session is obviously to decide how, when, and where you want to take sessions. And the most important thing for now is to work on building that relationship with the child, which is based on equality and based on positive regard. And in doing this, you need to be attuned to your child's needs and interests. You need to be thinking about the language that you're using. Remember, we're trying to empower the child, build their confidence, build their self-esteem, give them choices, allow them control over their own situation. And most importantly, get creative, get involved, have fun, and play. Thank you.